The grand chamber of the Galactic Council hung in the void like a jewel too proud to admit it was made of glass. It was not a building in any sense a human would recognize. It was a sphere 3 kilometers across, grown rather than constructed, its inner surface a terraced amphitheater of living crystal that pulsed with the slow, patient light of 10,000 species who had learned to stop fighting long before Earth's ancestors had learned to stand upright. Light filtered through the translucent hull in colors that had no names in any human tongue, and every delegate who floated in the tiered galleries did so with the unhurried confidence of a civilization that had never, in living memory, been surprised. Lieutenant Commander Ilara Voss was 29 years old, and she was about to become the most surprised person in the room. She stood at the base of the amphitheater on a small circular platform reserved for petitioners, and she felt the weight of every eye upon her the way a swimmer feels the pressure of deep water. There were beings here older than her entire planet's written history. There were minds that thought in geometries she could not perceive, that measured time in the erosion of mountains, that had watched suns kindle and die, and had catalogued the event with the mild interest of a botanist noting the bloom of a flower. And they were all looking at her, this small, warm creature from the small, warm world, and in their eyes she saw the one thing she had crossed 400 light-years to erase. "Pity," representative of the Terran Compact, intoned the Speaker of the Council, and its voice came from everywhere at once, translated and retranslated through a lattice of devices, until it arrived in Ilara's ear as something almost gentle. The speaker was of the V-Helm, a species of tall, reed-thin beings whose bodies rippled with bioluminescent script, and its every gesture was a study in elegant condescension. "You have petitioned this body for full membership. You have asked to sit among us as an equal. The Council has reviewed your world's dossier. We have considered your request with the seriousness it deserves." The phrasing was careful. Ilara had spent enough time among diplomats to hear the blade hidden inside the velvet. The seriousness it deserves, not the seriousness she hoped for, the seriousness they had decided it was worth. "And," she said, "just that. One word." She had been coached for weeks by the Compact's envoys to be deferential, to be humble, to bow her head and speak softly and remember always that Earth was the newcomer, the child, the species that had crawled out of its gravity barely 2 centuries ago, while these beings had been crossing the stars for tens of millennia. She had nodded through all of it. And now, standing here, she found that the coaching had drained out of her like water through a cracked cup, and what remained was the plain, flat directness that had gotten her through the academy, through the war games, through the long, cold watches on the edge of human space. A ripple of something passed through the galleries. Amusement, perhaps. The abruptness of her was itself a curiosity to them, like watching a small animal bare its teeth. The speaker inclined its long head. "The Council has determined that the Terran Compact does not meet the threshold for membership." There it was. "The threshold," Ilara repeated. "There are criteria," the speaker continued, and now a great luminous display unfurled in the air above the chamber, a slow-turning column of data rendered in the Council's own symbology, translated helpfully into human numerals along its lower edge. Economic self-sufficiency, cultural stability, scientific contribution, and of course, the metric that concerns this body most gravely in an age of border disputes and resource scarcity. The display shifted, and a single figure rose to prominence, glowing amber, demonstrated military capacity. Ilara looked at the number. It was Earth's assessed fleet strength as measured by the Council's observers. It was, she knew, a lie by omission of staggering proportions, but she said nothing, not yet. "Your assessed capacity," the speaker said, "is negligible. You possess perhaps 400 vessels of the line, the largest of which would be classified by this body as a light escort. You have no capital ships. You have no stellar-scale industry. Your world's number 3, and 2 of them are colonies barely a generation old. Commander Voss." The speaker's tone softened, and that was the worst part because the softness was genuine. It was not mocking her. It was consoling her. You must understand, membership in this council is not a courtesy. It is a responsibility. When the Krell raiders press against the outer reaches, it is council fleets that answer. When the silent war flares again along the Perseus frontier, it is council blood that pays. We cannot admit a member who would be a burden, a member we would have to protect, rather than one who could stand the line beside us. It would not be a kindness to you. It would be a sentence of death for your people, drawn into wars you cannot survive. She heard the delegates murmur their assent, a susurrus of agreement rolling around the tiers like surf. And she understood with a cold clarity that they believed they were being merciful. You have, said a new voice, harsher than the speaker's, a great deal of spirit. We do not doubt your courage. Courage is common. Even the smallest creatures have it when cornered. This was the delegate of the Ossic Dominion, a heavy world species armored in plates of grown ceramic, whose warships were legend along a dozen frontiers. Its name was Karthvom, and it commanded 3,000 vessels of the line, and it had come to this session specifically, Alara knew, to make sure Earth's petition died and stayed dead. The Ossic did not want competition for the mining rights in the disputed Tannhäuser Drift. A weak Earth was a convenient Earth. But spirit is not steel, little one. You come to us with empty hands and ask to be treated as though they were full. It is not contempt that answers you. It is arithmetic. It is arithmetic. Alara turned the phrase over. She almost smiled, because arithmetic was exactly the thing they had gotten wrong. May I speak, she said. It was not really a question. The speaker gestured. The petitioner may make a closing statement. The council's decision, however, is rendered. This is a formality of courtesy. Of course, Alara said, courtesy. She let the words sit there. Then she stepped forward to the very edge of the petitioner's platform, and she looked up at the 10,000 faces, and she did something no petitioner had done in the memory of the Grand Chamber. She laughed. It was quiet, and it was tired, and it was entirely without malice, and it silenced the murmuring galleries more completely than any shout could have. You've been very kind to me, she said. I want you to know that I understand you think you're being kind. You've looked at our numbers, 400 ships, 3 worlds, no capital vessels. You've run the arithmetic, and the arithmetic says we're children playing at a grown-up's table, and children should be sent home before they get hurt. I've read the same dossier you have. I helped compile parts of it. She paused. I helped decide what went into it, and what stayed out. The Ossic delegate shifted, a small motion, ceramic plates grinding. Explain yourself. 200 years ago, Alara said, we came out of our gravity well and we found a galaxy that had already been carved up, every rich system claimed, every trade lane taxed, every frontier patrolled by fleets 1,000 times the size of anything we could build. We were late. We were poor. We were small. And the first thing we learned, the very first thing, was that in this galaxy the weak are eaten. Not out of cruelty, out of arithmetic. She threw the word back gently, and she saw Karthvom register it. So we made a decision, a species-wide decision, ratified by every government of Earth in the single most unanimous vote in our history. We decided that the galaxy would never, ever, know how strong we actually were, until the moment we chose to show it. The chamber had gone very still. Even the ancient minds in the upper tiers, the ones who thought in the erosion of mountains, had turned their attention fully upon her now. You measured our fleet by our shipyards, Alara said. By the vessels you could see docked at Earth and Mars and Ceres, by what we let your observers photograph. You never asked yourselves a simple question. If a species knew it was weak and knew the strong get eaten and had 200 years to prepare, where would it build? Not where you could count. Never where you could count. The speaker's bioluminescent script had begun to flicker in a pattern Alara's briefings had taught her to recognize as unease. Commander Voss, this posturing does you no credit. Bluffs are the last refuge of the small. If Earth possessed the strength you imply, you would have demonstrated it long ago. You would have leveraged it. No species hides power. Power is the only currency that matters, and it is spent, or it is nothing. That, Alara said, is exactly what we counted on you believing. She raised her wrist. On it was a device the Council's security had scanned and cleared, deeming it a simple communications relay, which was precisely what it was. She had not smuggled a weapon into the Grand Chamber. She had smuggled in a phone call. I was sent here, she said, with 2 sets of instructions. The first was to petition for membership honestly and to accept your judgment if you found us worthy. I would have done that. I wanted to do that. I'd have gone home proud. Her thumb hovered over the device. The second set of instructions was sealed. I was to open it only if the Council dismissed us as too weak to matter, only if you decided we were a burden, a charity case. Something to be protected. She looked at the speaker, and something in her young face had changed, had hardened into something very old. You just did, so I'm opening it. Commander, the speaker began. My orders, Alara said, are 1 sentence long. She pressed the device. 2 words went out from the Grand Chamber. Encrypted, relayed, flung across 400 light-years, through a network of quantum-entangled beacons, that the Terran Compact had spent 40 years and half its economy secretly seeding through the dark places between the stars. In nebulae the Council never bothered to survey. In dead systems the Council had written off as worthless. In the vast cold nothing that every established power ignored because there was no profit in it. 2 words, traveling faster than any Council message could travel, because the Council had never thought it worth the cost to build what Earth had built in the dark. The 2 words were, show them. And 400 light-years away, in 300 hidden shipyards buried inside hollowed asteroids and shrouded in the shadow of gas giants, and drifting in the lightless deep where no star warmed the void, the answer to Alara Voss's laughter began to move. But she did not know that yet. In the Grand Chamber, nothing had visibly happened. The speaker regarded her with what might have been pity again, or might have been the first faint edge of doubt. You have sent a message, the speaker said. To whom, for what purpose? Commander, whatever theater you imagine you are staging, I assure you. How long, Alara interrupted, does a Council transit take, from your core systems to here, your fastest courier, your best jump engines, how long? The speaker paused. Days, depending on distance. Some routes, weeks. It is the nature of the void, nothing crosses it quickly. This is known to every species that has left its cradle. Right, Alara said softly. That's what everyone knows. That's what everyone built their strategy around. That the void is slow. That an armada takes weeks to gather, months to move, and that you'll always see it coming, always have time to prepare, always have warning. She nodded slowly. We decided we didn't like those rules, so for 200 years we broke them, quietly. One impossible thing at a time. And nobody noticed, because nobody thought a species as weak as us was worth watching. Karthvom's ceramic plates ground again, louder now. You speak of a fleet. Where is it then, human? Where is this armada you imply? I see one small woman on a petitioner's platform, and I grow weary of her theater. Alara looked up, not at the delegate, at the vast translucent dome of the Grand Chamber, through which the naked stars of the Council's home system were visible, cold and clear and eternal, scattered across the black like the fires of 1,000 watching gods. Give it a minute, she said. And the room, despite itself, looked up too. Nothing happened. For a span of seconds that felt like drowning, absolutely nothing happened, and Alara Voss stood on the petitioner's platform with her chin lifted, and her heart hammering against her ribs like a fist against a door, and she thought, with the small cold voice that lived at the back of every officer's mind, what if they were late? What if a beacon failed? What if 40 years and half an economy bought us nothing but a room full of aliens watching a foolish girl stare at the sky? She did not let it show on her face. That, too, she had been trained for. The Speaker of the Council recovered its composure first, as protocol demanded. Commander Voss, it said, and there was almost kindness in it, the kindness one shows a person who has embarrassed themselves and must be helped to leave with dignity. I think perhaps this session has gone on long enough. The council has rendered its judgment. Whatever signal you sent, whatever gesture you hope to make, it is time to accept. The stars went out. Not all of them, not at once. It began at the edge of the great dome, in the lower quadrant where the council's home star cast its pale light, and it spread like ink dropped in water, like a stain, like a shadow with no body to cast it. One by one, and then in clusters, and then in whole sweeping constellations, the ancient stars visible through the crystal hull of the grand chamber were blotted out, occluded, swallowed by shapes that had not been there a moment before, and that arrived without the courtesy of warning, without the slow crawl of an approaching fleet, without any of the days or weeks the void was supposed to demand. They arrived all at once. A delegate somewhere in the middle tiers made a sound. It was not a word in any language. It was the sound a living thing makes when the floor of its assumptions gives way beneath it. Because the shapes had formed now, resolving as they braked out of a transit no council sensor had detected, and the form was unmistakable and it was enormous. They were ships. They were dreadnoughts. They were vessels of a scale that the Grand Chamber's own displays, scrambling to catalog them, kept flagging as errors. Because the largest warship class the Council recognized was the Ossic siege hull at 9 kilometers of length, and the things now filling the sky above the Council's homeworld dwarfed a siege hull the way a siege hull dwarfed the petitioner's platform on which Alara stood. "Contacts," said an automated voice through the chamber's systems, its serene tone unraveling into something almost frightened. "Contacts, contacts, unregistered vessels translating in system. Count uncertain, count recalculating, count." "How many?" the speaker whispered. The number that finally resolved on the display hung in the air of the grand chamber like a sentence of judgment. 11,400. Karthvom of the Ossic Dominion, whose 3,000 ships had been the largest fleet ever assembled by a single council member, went absolutely silent. Its ceramic plates did not grind. It did not move at all. "And that," Alara said into the perfect stillness, "is the first wave." She had not raised her voice. She did not need to. The grand chamber, for the first time in the memory of any being present, was so quiet that a human's soft words carried to every tier. "I want to be very clear about what you're looking at," she went on, and she turned slowly on the platform so that she faced the full sweep of the galleries, 10,000 faces frozen in the dawning light of 11,000 engines. "Because I don't want any misunderstandings. Misunderstandings are how wars start, and we did not come here for a war. We came here for a conversation, but I think you'll agree it's a better conversation now that we're both being honest about the arithmetic." The nearest dreadnought had rotated to present its flank to the grand chamber, and its hull filled a third of the visible sky. It was matte black, drinking the starlight, and along its spine ran ridges of armor plating so thick that the display's tentative scans simply gave up trying to measure it. It bore no bright markings, no proud heraldry, just a single symbol near its prow, small against the vastness of the ship, rendered in the plain white light of a species that had spent 2 centuries learning not to be seen. A stylized image of the earth, the old blue marble, wreathed not in laurels but in a ring of unadorned iron. The Terran Compact had a name for these ships. They did not call them dreadnoughts, though that was what the Council's terrified systems labeled them. They called them the Quiet Fleet, because for 200 years, quiet was the whole point. "Each of those vessels," Alara said, "displaces more than your entire Ossic First Fleet combined. We built them in the dark. We built them where you don't look, out of materials from systems you called worthless, using industry you never counted because it doesn't sit at Earth or Mars where your observers photograph our little escort ships and write their little reports. You measured the front porch and assumed you'd seen the house." She let that land. "You hadn't seen the house. You hadn't seen the foundations. And you certainly had not seen the basement. A delegate in the upper tiers, one of the ancient ones, a being of the Sesh who thought in geological time, finally spoke, and its voice was a low harmonic tremor that Alara felt in her sternum. This is not possible. We would have known. An industrial base of this scale radiates. It leaves a signature, heat, neutrinos. The theft of resources on this order would have collapsed markets, triggered shortages, been seen asterisk. You cannot hide the construction of 11,000 capital ships. It cannot be done. It has never been done. In 40,000 years of council history, it has never once been done. You're right, Alara said. It's never been done, which is exactly why it worked. You built a galaxy on the assumption that it couldn't be done, so you never looked for it. We hid the heat in the atmospheres of gas giants. We hid the neutrinos in the glare of stars. We didn't steal resources from your markets. We mined the dead systems you'd surveyed and discarded, the failed stars and the shattered worlds and the drifting rock you decided wasn't worth the shipping cost. We made 100,000 small, inefficient choices that no rational species would ever make, because every one of them kept us invisible. Her voice was quiet and even and utterly without triumph, and that was somehow the most frightening thing of all. We were willing to be poor for 200 years so that we could be safe forever. You called that weakness. We called it patience. The Sesh delegate said nothing more. Karthvom finally stirred. When the Ossic spoke, its translated voice had lost its earlier contempt and acquired something harder and more careful. Then it is a threat. You have come with a fleet to intimidate this council, to extort membership at the point of a gun. This is an act of war against the entire. No, Alara said, and for the first time there was steel in it, a snap of command that cut the Ossic delegate off mid-sentence. No, listen to me very carefully, delegate, because this is the part that matters and I need every one of you to hear it correctly. If we wanted to conquer you, you would already be conquered. You would not have had 10 seconds of warning. Those ships would have arrived at your shipyards, your defense platforms, your homeworlds, and you would have learned about the quiet fleet the way a man learns about a landslide all at once and too late and never in words. She let the horror of that breathe in the silent chamber. We have had the capacity to do that for at least 60 years. We chose not to. Every single year for 60 years, we woke up able to end the Ossic Dominion, able to end the V-Helm, able to end the entire council in an afternoon, and every single year we chose to file a polite membership petition instead. Do you understand what I'm telling you? We are not here because we are strong. We have always been strong. We are here because we are tired of pretending we're not. The Speaker of the Council, whose script had been flickering wildly, went suddenly still, and Alara understood that the being had at last stopped calculating threat and started calculating something else. Something closer to the truth. Why, the speaker said slowly, would a power such as you describe ask permission for anything? And there was the first intelligent question anyone in the chamber had asked her. Alara smiled, and it was not the tired smile from before. It was something younger and fiercer and, in its way, kinder. Now you're asking the right questions, she said. Sit down, all of you, please. The theater's over. The real conversation is about to start, and it's going to take longer than a minute. Above the grand chamber, 11,000 dreadnoughts held their formation in perfect, patient silence, and did nothing at all, which was, Alara thought, the most articulate argument her species had ever made. Far above the grand chamber, on the bridge of the lead dreadnought, a vessel her crew had named asterisk 22,000 mornings asterisk, a name no one outside the program had ever been meant to understand. A woman watched the same silence Alara was living, and held her breath. Fleet Admiral Kesh Vasanand was 71 years old, and she had commanded the quiet fleet for 19 years, and she was, though almost no one in the galaxy knew it, the prime envoy who had chosen Alara for this hour. She was also, by a coincidence that was not a coincidence at all, no relation to Alara by blood but everything to her by choice. The woman who had recruited a 14-year-old girl from Ceres into the deep program, who had watched her rise, who had argued the strategic sell into sending a young officer instead of an old warlord, and who now sat on the bridge of the flagship, 400 light-years and one thin channel of quantum signal away from the child she had gambled everything on. "Confirm formation," Kesh said, and her voice was calm, because a fleet takes its calm from its admiral the way a sea takes its stillness from the absence of wind. "Weapons cold. All weapons cold. I want every reactor idling low and every gun port sealed. If a single ship in this fleet so much as warms a targeting array, I will personally see its captain flying a supply barge for the rest of their natural life. Is that understood?" "Understood, Admiral," came the chorus from her bridge crew, and she felt the discipline of it settle over the fleet like a hand pressing down a wave. This was the part the galaxy would never fully appreciate, Kesh thought, the sheer, teeth-grinding difficulty of arriving in overwhelming force and doing nothing. Any fool could bring a fleet somewhere and start shooting. It took a civilization's worth of discipline to bring 11,000 of the deadliest ships ever built into the heart of an enemy's power and hold them, engines cold, guns sealed, waiting on the words of a 29-year-old woman standing alone on a petitioner's platform, trusting her to win a war of arguments that no admiral could fight for her. Every instinct Kesh had, every year of training, screamed to do something, to raise shields, to spread the formation, to at least warm the guns as a precaution. She overrode every instinct because the entire strategy, the entire 200-year gamble, lived or died on the galaxy seeing a fleet that had come in peace and proved it by doing the hardest thing a fleet can do, which is to arrive and then simply, patiently, refuse to be a weapon. "Signal from the chamber relay," her comms officer said suddenly. "Council's convened an emergency vote. Repeat, they've called it to the floor." Kesh closed her eyes. So it had come to the vote already, faster than they'd modeled. That could mean the room had turned, or it could mean a faction was moving to strike before Earth could react. Either way, the next few minutes would decide whether the child she'd raised in the dark came home a hero or came home not at all. "Do we have eyes on the floor?" she asked. "Audio only. The girl's still talking, ma'am. The officer paused, listening, and something moved across his face. "She just told the whole council to count the mornings instead of the ships." Kesh Vasanen, who had spent 19 years commanding a fleet built to never be used, who had made the deal 1,000 times over. The secret is worth more than the colony. The secret is worth more than the frontier dead. The secret is worth more than everything except the day it finally isn't. Kesh put her weathered hand over her mouth. And above the enemy's homeworld, in the cold light of 11,000 engines she had ordered to stay dark, she found that her eyes had filled. "Count the mornings," she repeated softly to no one. "That's my girl, that's exactly right." And then louder to the bridge, "Hold formation, hold everything. Whatever they decide down there we hold and we trust her and we do not fire. That's the whole war, people. That's the only war we've ever been fighting. Let's not lose it in the last 10 minutes." On the great display, 11,000 icons hung motionless above an alien world, engines cold, guns sealed, waiting, the most articulate silence in the history of the stars. To understand how a woman of 29 came to be standing beneath 11,000 warships, holding the fate of the Galactic Council in the palm of her hand, one has to understand that Ilara Voss had never once, in her entire life, believed the story her people told the galaxy. She had grown up on Ceres, in the tunnels beneath the ice, the daughter of a hull welder and a systems engineer. The colony where she was raised was, on paper, a modest mining outpost, 3,000 souls scratching a living from the belt, exactly the kind of small, poor human settlement the Council's observers noted and dismissed. Ilara had believed that as a child. She had believed her world was small, and her people were poor, and the great powers of the galaxy were things to be feared and admired from a great distance. Then, when she was 14, her mother had taken her down. Not down into the ordinary tunnels. Down past the ordinary tunnels, through a maintenance shaft that shouldn't have led anywhere, past a security door that scanned her mother's retina and her mother's blood and something in her mother's voice, and down, into a hollow at the heart of the asteroid that Alara had not known existed, and that, she would later learn, did not exist on any map the Council could ever see. The hollow was 40 kilometers across, and it was full of ships. Not finished ships, ships in the bones. Vast skeletal frameworks of dreadnoughts under construction, their ribs of dark alloy arcing up into the darkness, swarmed by welding drones and pressure-suited workers and automated foundries that ran without pause and without light beyond the sparks of their own labor. Her mother had held her hand at the edge of the observation gallery, and 14-year-old Alara had looked out at the impossible cathedral of steel her people had been building in secret beneath her feet her entire life, and her mother had said the words that Alara would carry for the rest of her life. Every species in this galaxy, her mother had said, is exactly as strong as its enemies believe it to be, not 1 gram more. We learned that the hard way a long time ago when we were weak and everyone knew it, so we made a decision. We would be weak in every way they could see and strong in every way they couldn't, and we would let them believe the lie for as long as it took. It's the hardest thing a proud people can do, Alara. It's harder than fighting. Any fool can pull a trigger. It takes a whole civilization, generation after generation, to hold its fire. For how long, Alara had asked, how long do we have to pretend? And her mother had said, until pretending costs more than the truth, not 1 day before. Your grandmother built these ships and never told a soul outside the program. I've spent my whole life keeping the secret. Maybe you will too, or maybe. And here her mother had looked at her, really looked at her, maybe you'll be the one who gets to stop. Alara had joined the fleet at 18. Not the visible fleet, the little escort ships and patrol boats that the Council counted and catalogued, that flew the human flag openly along the trade lanes and got taxed and searched and condescended to. She had served on those too, for a while, as cover. But her real commission was in the other fleet, the quiet one, the one that trained in the dark systems and drilled in the shadow of gas giants and learned to fly the great black dreadnoughts that officially did not exist. She had commanded a squadron of them by 26. She had been part of the strategic planning cell by 28, one of a few hundred humans alive who knew the true disposition of the quiet fleet, the true scale of the shadow industry, the true answer to the question the whole galaxy had gotten wrong. And so when the Compact's leadership had decided at last, after 200 years, that the time of pretending was coming to an end, when the Krell raids on the outer reaches had grown bold enough that hiding was becoming its own kind of danger, when the human population had grown large enough that its worlds could no longer be plausibly concealed, when the Council's dismissal of Earth had begun to invite the very predation the secret had been built to prevent. They had needed someone to carry the message into the Grand Chamber, someone who could stand at the base of the amphitheater and take the pity and the condescension and the arithmetic, and hold it all in, and not flinch, and then, at exactly the right moment, open the sealed envelope and change the shape of the galaxy. They had needed someone young. That had been a deliberate choice, and a debated one. The old strategists had argued for a veteran, a hardened flag officer, someone whose gravity would command respect. But the prime envoy, an old woman named Kesh who had spent her life in the deep game, had overruled them. We are about to reveal that we have been lying to the entire galaxy for 200 years, Kesh had said. That will frighten them, and frightened powers do dangerous things. We must not send them a warlord. A warlord confirms their worst fear, that we are conquerors who have finally decided to strike. We must send them the opposite. We must send them a future. We must send them someone young enough that the Council can look at her and understand that this is not the last act of an aggressive old empire, but the first act of a young one that intends to be here for a very, very long time, and that would strongly prefer, to spend that time as a neighbor rather than a nightmare. Send them the girl. Send them Voss. Let them see how young she is, and let them do the arithmetic on how young the strength behind her must therefore be, and how much of it is still to come. It had been, everyone agreed afterward, a masterstroke. But standing in the grand chamber with the sealed envelope pressed against her heart, hearing the speaker of the council pronounce Earth too weak to matter, Alara had felt none of the strategic elegance of it. She had felt only the long weight of her mother's hand on hers at the edge of that observation gallery, and the words "maybe you'll be the one who gets to stop," and the sudden vertiginous understanding that she was the one. 60 years of held fire, 200 years of patient poverty, 3 generations of families who had welded dreadnoughts in the dark and gone to their graves without ever telling the galaxy. All of it had narrowed down to this room, and this moment, and her thumb hovering over a device the size of a coin. Show them. She had thought in the instant before she pressed it of her mother. Her mother had died 4 years ago on Ceres without ever seeing the fleet fly free. Her mother had spent her whole life keeping a secret so large it had bent the shape of her, and she had done it gladly, because she had believed that one day it would buy her people something better than fear. Alara pressed the device for her grandmother, whose name she had never been allowed to speak outside the program, for 3 generations of the silent and the patient and the strong who pretended to be weak. And now she stood in the ringing silence of the grand chamber, beneath the answer to all that patience, and she watched 10,000 of the galaxy's proudest beings look up at the sky and understand, all at once, that everything they thought they knew about the small warm world and its small warm people had been a story that the small warm people had let them tell. "Sit down," she said again, more gently this time. "Please, I mean it. Nobody up there is going to fire. Nobody has ever fired. That's the entire point I'm trying to make. But we are going to have a conversation now, a real one, and I'd rather have it with a council that's sitting than one that's already deciding whether to run." Slowly, one by one, the delegates settled back into their tiers. It was not obedience. It was something closer to the paralysis of an animal that has seen a predator and realized in the seeing that the predator has had it in view for a very long time and simply chosen not to strike. There is a particular horror in that realization, worse, in its way, than being attacked, to learn that you have been alive only by permission. The speaker of the council drew itself up. To its credit, and Alara noted it and respected it, its voice did not shake. "Very well, Commander Voss," it said. "You have our attention. You have, I think, the attention of the entire galaxy, though it does not yet know it. So I will ask you plainly, and I ask you to answer plainly, as you have asked us to be honest about arithmetic." It paused. "What is it that Earth actually wants?" And Alara Voss, 29 years old, daughter of a hull welder, granddaughter of a secret, took a breath and told them. There was a delegate in the 7th tier who would, in the years to come, write the definitive account of that hour, a chronicler of the Illuvi, a species whose entire culture was built around the faithful recording of history. In its memoir it would try and fail, and try again to capture the precise texture of the moment the stars went out. It had witnessed, in its long life, the coronation of 3 speakers, the ending of 2 frontier wars, the discovery of a dead god's tomb on a world at the galaxy's rim. None of it, it wrote, had prepared it for the simple animal terror of looking up at a sky. It had known its whole life and watching that sky be taken, occluded, one constellation at a time, by shapes that arrived without permission and without warning, and without the slow, decent crawl the void was supposed to guarantee. "We had built our entire civilization," the chronicler would write, "upon the quiet assumption that we would always see the enemy coming. Every treaty, every fortress, every strategy rested on that one foundation. The void is slow, and therefore we are safe, and therefore we have time. In the space of 10 seconds, A young woman from a world we had dismissed as beneath our notice reached out and pulled that foundation from beneath 40,000 years of history. She did not fire a shot to do it. She did not raise her voice. She simply let us look up and see and understand that everything we had believed about our own safety had been a courtesy extended to us by strangers we never bothered to fear. I have tried many times to name what I felt in that moment. The closest I have come is this. It was the feeling of a child who learns, all at once and far too late, that the dark it had always been afraid of was in fact full of watchers, and that the watchers had been kind. The chronicler was not alone in its terror, but it was, perhaps, alone in how quickly its terror turned to something stranger and more lasting. Because as the hour wore on, as the human spoke and the fleet held its silence and no shot was fired and no demand was made, the chronicler found the fear in its breast slowly, reluctantly, transmuting into a thing it had not expected and could barely name. Awe, yes. But under the awe, something almost like gratitude, and under the gratitude, most disorienting of all, the dawning suspicion that it was in the presence of a kind of strength its own ancient and accomplished people had never once, in all their long history, managed to achieve. The strength not to strike. The strength to have every reason and every capacity for cruelty, and to lay it down morning after morning for 60 years, and ask in the end only to be let in. The chronicler had spent its life recording the deeds of the powerful. It realized, in the 7th tier, that it had never before understood what power was actually for. "We want exactly what we came here asking for," Alara said. "Membership, a seat, a voice, nothing more and nothing less." A stir went through the galleries. It was not the answer they had braced for. "You have a fleet that could depose this council in an afternoon," the speaker said, "and you want a seat. You could demand tribute. You could demand the Tannhäuser drift, the Perseus mining rights, the dissolution of the Ossic dominion, a throne above us all, any of it, all of it, and you ask to be seated as one voice among 10,000. Its script rippled. "Forgive me, Commander, I have governed a long time. When a power arrives with overwhelming force and asks for something modest, I have learned to be more afraid, not less. Modesty backed by dreadnoughts is the most expensive thing in the galaxy. What is the price?" "There's no hidden price," Alara said, "but there's a reason. Let me give it to you, because I think when you hear it you'll understand why we did all of this the way we did it, and why a seat is exactly, precisely what we want, and why we'd rather die than take the throne you're so afraid we'll seize." She stepped down off the petitioner's platform. It was a small thing, but the whole chamber marked it, the human leaving the place reserved for the humble supplicant and walking, unhurried, into the open floor at the center of the amphitheater, where no one stood, where a person could be seen from every tier at once. She stood there in the pooled light of 11,000 engines, and she spoke to them not as a petitioner but as an equal, which was, she supposed, the entire point. 200 years ago, she said, we came out of our gravity well and we found the galaxy already carved up, and we understood immediately that we had two ways to survive. The first way was the obvious one. Get strong and take. Build a fleet in secret, then use it to seize systems, to extort, to conquer, to carve out an empire the way empires have always been carved. Force works. Nobody in this room needs me to explain that force works. Half of you sit in this chamber because your ancestors were better at force than someone else's ancestors. Nobody argued. It was, Alara knew, simply true, and they knew she knew it. But we looked at that path, she went on, and we looked at what it produced, and we didn't like the ending, because here is the thing about ruling by force. It never ends. You conquer a frontier, and now you have to hold it against everyone who wants it back. You seize a rich system, and now every neighbor fears you, and fear makes enemies, and enemies make war, and war never stops, because the empire that rules by fear can never once, not for a single year, afford to look weak. It has to fight forever. It has to win forever. And the day it finally loses, and everything loses eventually, everything in this galaxy that has ever tried to win forever has eventually lost, The day it loses, everyone it ever frightened comes for it all at once, and there is no mercy because it taught the galaxy that mercy is weakness. She looked slowly around the tiers. We ran that arithmetic too. And we decided we didn't want to spend eternity holding a knife to the galaxy's throat, waiting for the day our arm got tired. So you chose the second way, the Sesh delegate rumbled, understanding dawning in its geological voice. We chose the second way, Alara agreed. We decided we would get strong as we possibly could, stronger than anyone, strong enough that no one could ever threaten us. And then we would spend that strength on the one thing force can never buy. We would use it to earn the right to never have to use it. We would build the fleet and hide the fleet and hold the fleet, for as long as it took, until we had grown enough and prospered enough and proven ourselves peaceable enough that we could walk into this chamber and ask, honestly and openly, to join. Not to rule, to join. Because a member of the council is safe not because it is feared, but because it is one of you. Because attacking it means attacking all of you. We didn't want to be the strongest wolf in the galaxy, delegate. We wanted to stop being wolves at all. And the only way a small, poor, frightened people ever gets to stop being afraid, the only way is to become so strong that fear becomes a choice. And then to choose, freely and openly and with the whole galaxy watching, to lay it down. The silence in the grand chamber had changed. It was no longer the silence of terror. It was the silence of 10,000 ancient minds recalculating, all at once, everything they had assumed about the small, warm world. You could still be lying, Karthvom said, but the contempt was entirely gone from the Ossic's voice now, replaced by something that was almost respect. This could be the gentlest possible face on the most patient conquest in history. You show us mercy today, seat yourselves among us, and in 50 years when we have forgotten to be afraid, you close your fist. I could be lying, Alara agreed. You have no way to be certain. That's the terrible thing about trust, it's always a bet. But let me offer you the only proof I have, which is this. She raised her hand toward the sky, toward the 11,000 dreadnoughts hanging silent above the council's homeworld. Look at them, really look. Not one of them has powered a weapon. Our arrival was calculated to the second, our formation is defensive, our engines are cold now that we've stopped. We came into the heart of your power, into the one place in the galaxy where your defenses are strongest, and we did not fire, and we will not fire, and every second that passes is another second in which we could have ended you and did not. That is the only argument I have. It is the argument my people have been making in silence for 60 years. Every morning we didn't attack. Every year we filed a petition instead of a demand. You just never heard the argument because it was made in a language of restraint, and restraint is invisible until someone points at it and says, look at what we chose not to do. Look at all the mornings we let you live. She lowered her hand. So here is our petition restated, she said. Full membership in the Galactic Council, a single seat. A single voice. In exchange, we bring the quiet fleet into the open, register it, submit it to the same treaties and inspections and limitations that bind every other member, and pledge it to the common defense of the Council against the Krell, against the silent war, against every threat that presses on your frontiers, the same frontiers you told me, an hour ago, that we were too weak to help defend. A thin edge of irony there, and she let them feel it. You said you could not admit a member you would have to protect. Well, here we are. It turns out we're the ones who can protect you. The question on the table is no longer whether Earth is worthy of the Council. The question is whether the Council is wise enough to say yes to the strongest ally it will ever be offered, or foolish enough to say no, and spend the next 1,000 years wondering what a spurned Earth might eventually decide to do with all those ships. She let that hang. It was not a threat. She had been careful to make it not quite a threat, but it was the truth, and the truth had teeth of its own. The Speaker of the Council was quiet for a long moment. When it spoke, its voice was heavy with the weight of 40,000 years of governance, and something new underneath it, something that might have been the beginning of a very different kind of respect. You understand, it said, that we cannot simply vote. A revelation of this magnitude, a power of this magnitude, this changes the entire strategic architecture of the galaxy. Every member here will need to consult its own government. There will be fear. There will be factions who argue we must strike first, before your fleet grows any larger, before the window closes. There will be others who argue we must appease you at any cost. You have not ended the danger, Commander Voss. You have merely made it visible. And visible danger has a way of provoking exactly the war it was meant to prevent. I know, Ilara said quietly. Believe me, I know. We debated this for 40 years. The single greatest risk of revealing ourselves was always this exact moment. The risk that fear would make you reckless, that some faction somewhere would decide the only safe Earth is a destroyed Earth, and that we'd end up in the war we spent 2 centuries avoiding. We're not naive. We know what we've just done. We've handed you a terror and asked you to be wise about it, and wisdom is a lot to ask of the frightened. Then why, the speaker asked, reveal yourselves at all? You were safe in the shadows. You could have gone on hiding for another 1,000 years. And here Ilara's composure flickered just slightly, just enough that the ancient minds in the upper tiers marked it, the first crack in the young officer's armor, and through it, something raw and human and true. Because hiding was killing us, she said. There was, of course, a faction that did not want to be wise. Even as the speaker spoke of consultation and treaties, Ilara had watched a particular quadrant of the upper tiers, where a cluster of delegates had drawn close together and gone very quiet in a way that had nothing to do with awe. She had studied the council's factional maps for months. She recognized the delegates of the Conquered of Iron, the hardline defense bloc that had grown powerful during the long grind of the Silent War. They were species who had built their entire political identity on the doctrine of the first strike, the belief that the only safe threat is a dead one, that mercy shown to a rival is a debt your grandchildren will pay in blood. To them, everything Ilara had said was not reassurance. It was the confession of a monster explaining, patiently, why it had not yet eaten them. And a monster that explains itself is only more terrifying because it means the monster can think. The delegate of the Conquered rose. It was a Threx, a predatory species of the deep cold worlds, its body a nightmare architecture of chitin and cold intelligence, and when it spoke the translation came through clipped and hard. The human speaks beautifully, the Threx said. I will grant her that. She has come into our house with a knife the size of a moon, and she has explained with great feeling why she has chosen not to use it yet. And you, it swept a limb across the stunned galleries, you sit here moved to tears by her restraint like prey grateful to the predator for its patience. I am not moved. I am appalled. Do you not see what has just happened? A power has revealed that it has held total dominance over all of us for 60 years, and we did not know. We could not detect it. We cannot detect it now. For all we know, this fleet of 11,000 is itself a fraction, a display piece, a curtain drawn across a force 10 times larger still. We are being asked to seat at the very center of our councils, inside our every defense and secret and vulnerability, a species that has already proven it can hide anything from us, indefinitely, at will. The Threx's cold eyes fixed on Ilara. I say this is the single most dangerous moment in the history of the Council, and I say the only rational response to a knife at your throat is not gratitude. It is to combine every fleet we possess this hour, and strike that armada before it grows, before it hides again, before we lose the one thing we will never get back, the knowledge of where it is. The Conquered of Iron will not vote to seat Earth. The Conquered of Iron votes for war. The chamber erupted. Not into shouting, the council was too old and too disciplined for that, but into a low roiling turbulence of 1,000 overlapping voices, translations crashing into translations, and beneath it Ilara could feel the balance of the room tilting, sliding, the awe curdling into the very fear she had spent 40 years of planning trying to forestall. This was the knife edge. This was the exact moment the strategist had lain awake dreading. She had known it would come. She had rehearsed a dozen responses. And now that it was here, she discarded all of them, because none of them were true enough, and only the truth was going to hold this room. She raised her hand for silence, and remarkably, she got it, not out of respect, but because every being in the chamber wanted, desperately, to hear what the human would say in the face of a call for its annihilation. "You're right," Alara said to the Threx. That more than anything stopped the room. "You're right that you can't detect us. You're right that this fleet might be a fraction. I won't tell you whether it is, because a soldier doesn't disclose her reserves, and you'd be a fool to believe me either way. You're right that seeding us means trusting a species that has proven it can deceive you completely. Every word you said is correct." She let the concession sink into the stunned quiet. "And here is the part you got wrong. You said the only rational response to a knife at your throat is to strike first. But delegate, the knife has been at your throat for 60 years. You just found out about it today. Striking first is not available to you. It was never available to you. You are 60 years too late to strike first, and the only reason you're alive to propose it is that we have spent those 60 years choosing, every single morning, not to draw the blade. You want to talk about a first strike? We had the first strike. We had it for 60 years, and we gave it back to you, unused, every day, as a gift you didn't even know you were receiving." The Threx's chitin rasped, "Words. Do the arithmetic," Alara said, and now there was iron in her, the command voice, and it cut. "Right now, in your head. You want to combine every fleet in the council and strike. Fine, let's say you do. Let's say every delegate here agrees and you assemble the greatest armada the galaxy has ever seen, and it takes you, what did the speaker say, days, weeks, to gather it because your fleets are scattered and the void is slow for you. Weeks of visible, undeniable, galaxy-spanning mobilization. And in those weeks, what do you imagine we'll be doing? We, who can cross the void without your sensors seeing us come. We, who arrived here today with no warning at all." She let the horror of it build. "We would not wait for your armada, delegate. We would never let it assemble. The war you are proposing does not begin with your first strike. It begins with our last *1, with 11,000 dreadnoughts, or however many there truly are, arriving at every shipyard and defense platform and homeworld in the conquered of iron in the same instant, with no warning, exactly as we arrived here. You would not lose a war. You would simply one morning cease. That is what a first strike against Earth looks like, and I am begging you, begging you not to make us prove it, because we do not want to. It is the last thing in the galaxy we want. But if you force a war of annihilation upon us, understand that we did not spend 200 years learning to hide so that we could lose it." The silence that followed was absolute. "So no," Alara said, quieter now, the commanded sheathing itself. "The rational response to our knife is not to strike. You've missed that window by 6 decades. The rational response is the one thing that has actually kept you alive this whole time, the thing you never knew you were relying on. Our restraint. You have been alive, delegate, on the strength of Earth's good faith for 60 years. The only question in front of this council is whether you would like that arrangement to continue by accident as an outsider's mercy or by treaty as an ally's oath. That's it. That's the entire vote, not whether to trust a monster. Whether to make a friend of one who has already, provably, spared you 1,000 times over." For a moment it seemed the Threx might answer with defiance anyway. Its chitin rasped, its cold limbs shifted, and Alara braced for the possibility that pride would override arithmetic, as pride so often did. She had wargamed this too. If the conquered forced a vote for war and lost, that was survivable. If it forced a vote for war and won asterisk, if the fear in the chamber crested at the wrong moment and a majority chose the reckless path, then 11,000 dreadnoughts would have to prove they were not a bluff, and 200 years of restraint would end in a single terrible morning, and everything her mother and grandmother had built in the dark would have been for nothing but a graveyard. She kept her face still. She had learned that a diplomat's stillness in the moment of maximum danger is worth more than any argument, because a frightened room takes its temperature from the calmest thing in it, and she intended to be the calmest thing in this one if it killed her. Around the chamber, she could see the calculation moving through the tiers like weather. The great powers were doing the math the Threx had refused to finish. The math of a mobilization that would take weeks against an enemy that needed no warning. The math of a war whose opening move belonged entirely to the other side. She watched a delegate of the Wilhelm Defense Ministry, one who had surely come prepared to back the conquered, slowly fold its luminous limbs and look away, unwilling to meet the Threx's eye. One by one, the would-be hawks were arriving at the same conclusion, in the privacy of their own terror. There was no version of the first strike where they survived it, and a strike you cannot survive is not a strategy. It is a suicide with extra steps. The Threx did not sit down. It stood, rigid in the ringing aftermath of Alara's words, and for a long moment the entire chamber balanced on the point of its silence. Then it spoke again, and its voice had changed, not softened, but hollowed, the sound of a predator that has run every angle of the hunt and found no angle where it survives. "You have thought about this longer than we have," the Threx said. "That is the thing I cannot forgive and cannot deny. We are debating in a panic in an hour a question your people have wargamed for 2 centuries. We are children at the table now. You have made asterisk us the children." It let out a long, grinding hiss. "I still do not trust you, human, understand that. If I had one clean shot, one certainty of victory, I would take it and I would sleep well after. But you have shown me, correctly, that I do not have that shot and never did. And a warrior who strikes without the shot is not brave. He is merely the first casualty of a war he chose to lose." The Threx lowered itself slowly back into its tier. "The conquered of iron withdraws its motion for war. It will abstain. It will watch. And if Earth ever gives us the shot, if you ever once break the faith you speak of so beautifully, we will remember this day and we will not hesitate. But today, I will not spend my people's lives to prove a point already lost. Speak on, human. You have earned the floor, if only because none of us can take it from you." And with that, the last serious voice for war fell silent, and the whole architecture of the chamber's fear seemed to exhale. Alara did not gloat. She had learned in the long training for this hour that the most dangerous moment after winning an argument is the temptation to win it twice. She simply inclined her head to the Threx, a small, grave gesture of respect between 2 soldiers who understood each other perfectly, and turned back to the speaker. "I want to say something to the delegate of the conquered and to everyone who agrees with it," she said, "because there are more of you than are willing to stand up, and I'd rather answer you all than let the fear fester in the dark where it grows. You're afraid we'll betray you. That in 50 years, when you've forgotten to watch us, we'll close the fist. I can't prove to you that we won't. Trust never comes with proof. That's what makes it trust. But I can tell you why we won't, and you can decide for yourselves whether the reason holds." She paused, choosing the words with care. "We didn't build the quiet fleet to conquer. If we had, we'd have used it already 60 years ago, when it would have been easiest, when you were weakest, when you never saw us coming. A conqueror doesn't wait 60 years past the perfect moment. A conqueror strikes when striking is cheap. We didn't. Not because we're saints, I've buried enough frontier dead to know we're not, but because conquest was never the goal. The goal was always this. This room. This seat. This chance to stop being afraid without making anyone else afraid in our place. If we betray you in 50 years, we betray the entire 200 years of sacrifice that got us here. We'd be spitting on every grave in the program, on my mother's grave. And I know my people, delegate. I've flown with them in the dark for 11 years. They don't have it in them. They spent too long learning restraint to throw it away for an empire none of them ever wanted." She looked around the tiers one last time, and her voice gentled into something almost like an offering. "You spent this whole session measuring our fleet. Let me give you a better measurement. Count the mornings. Count every single morning of the last 60 years, and know that on every one of them, a species that could have ruled the galaxy woke up and chose, freely, to remain a guest at your door instead. 21,900 mornings, near enough. 21,900 choices to be gentle when we didn't have to be. That's the number that should be on your display, speaker. Not the ships, the mornings, because the ships only tell you what we can do. The mornings tell you what we will. The debate that followed the Threx's withdrawal lasted the better part of a council rotation, and Alara stood through all of it. She would not sit. She had decided, somewhere in the long hours, that as long as her people's fleet hung in the sky doing the hardest thing a fleet can do, she would stand and do the hardest thing a diplomat can do, which is to remain, and answer, and never once let the fear that filled the chamber find a foothold in her own face. They asked her everything. A delegate of the trade combines asked, with trembling frankness, whether Earth intended to seize the shipping lanes now that its strength was known, and Alara answered that Earth would pay the same lane taxes it had always paid, and submit to the same inspections, because a member that flouts the common law is no member at all. A cluster of the smaller species, the ones who had, until this hour, been the weakest voices in the chamber, the ones most like what Earth had pretended to be, asked, haltingly, whether a strong Earth would protect small worlds or prey upon them, and Alara looked at them a long moment before she answered, because these were the questions that mattered most. "We were you," she said to the small delegations. "For 200 years we were exactly you, the newcomers, the poor ones, the ones the great powers dismissed. I grew up reading casualty reports from colonies nobody bothered to defend because we were too small to matter. I know what it is to be small in this galaxy. And I promise you this, and I'll put it in the treaty in whatever language you like. The first thing Earth intends to spend its strength on is not conquest and not tribute. It's the frontier. It's the raided colonies and the undefended lanes and the small worlds the great powers have always written off as not worth the shipping cost. We spent 200 years unable to protect our own people. We are not going to spend the next 200 failing to protect yours. If you want to know what a strong Earth is for, that's what it's for. It's for the small worlds. It always was." A murmur went through the lesser tiers, and it was not fear. It was something the smaller species had not felt in a very long time inside this chamber, and it took Alara a moment to recognize it, because it was so unexpected in that place of ancient power. It was hope. And that, in the end, was what turned the vote. Not the terror of the dreadnoughts. Terror alone might have driven the frightened to recklessness. It was the smaller species, the dozens of minor delegations who had spent centuries at the bottom of the council's hierarchy, suddenly seeing in Earth not a new master but a champion, a power that had been where they were, that remembered, that promised the one thing the great old powers had never offered them: protection without a price of submission. When the smaller delegations began, one by one, to signal their ascent, the great powers found the ground shifting beneath them. To vote against Earth now was to vote against the frontier, against the small worlds, against the tide of hope moving through the lower tiers. Even the conquered of Iron's abstention began to look, in that light, less like caution and more like being left behind. When the speaker finally called the formal tally, Alara felt the whole chamber lean into it. 10,000 species holding a breath they had held, in one sense, for 200 years without knowing. The votes rose through the tiers like the lights of a city coming on at dusk. She watched them bloom, the great powers weighing survival against pride, the small worlds voting with a swiftness that was almost joy, the ancient minds in the upper tiers casting their assent with the slow gravity of beings who measured this hour against 40,000 years, and found it, at last, worth the chain. The tally climbed and climbed, past the threshold, past any possibility of reversal, into a majority so broad that even the speaker paused before announcing it, as though it could not quite believe the number its own systems returned. Alara did not cheer. She looked up past the votes, past the crystal dome to the fleet, and she thought of a bridge 400 light-years away and an old woman who had recruited her from the ice of Ceres, holding her breath in the cold light of engines she had ordered to stay dark. We did it, Kesh, asterisk, she thought. We stopped. After 200 years, we finally get to stop. Killing you, the speaker repeated. Explain. Alara was quiet for a moment, gathering it. This was the part her briefings had not scripted, because no briefing could. This was the part she had to give them, true, or not at all. A secret that large doesn't come free, she said. You pay for it. Every day for 200 years you pay for it. Do you know what it costs a people to be strong and pretend to be weak? Not in resources, in the soul. She looked around the tears, and the young weariness was back in her face, the weariness that had made her laugh at the start of all this. When the Krell raiders hit our outer reach colonies, and they did, delegate, they hit them, because you told the galaxy Earth was too weak to defend itself, and the galaxy believed you, we had to let it happen. We had 11,000 dreadnoughts, and we let raiders burn our colonies, because sending even one ship to defend them would have shown our hand. Do you understand? We watched our own people die on the frontier. We buried children. We read the casualty reports, and we did nothing, because the secret was worth more than their lives. That was the deal. That was always the deal. And you can only make that deal so many times before your own people start asking what, exactly, all this strength is asterisk for, if it can't even save a colony full of families from a handful of pirates. The chamber was silent. Even the Ossic delegate had gone very still. A hidden fleet doesn't defend anyone, Alara said. That's the thing nobody tells you about deterrence you can't reveal. It's just metal. It's the most expensive collection of scrap in the galaxy. It protects nothing, because to protect something you have to be seen asterisk protecting it, and the moment you're seen, the secret's gone. So we sat on the greatest military power the galaxy has ever known, and we used it to protect exactly one thing, the secret itself. We built a strength so total we couldn't spend a single gram of it, and we called that safety, and every year it got a little harder to believe. My mother believed it. Her mother believed it. But my generation, she stopped. Steadied, my generation grew up reading the casualty reports from colonies we could have saved. And we started to ask whether a strength that can never be used is any different from weakness. Whether we'd spent 200 years and 3 generations building a wall so high that we ended up imprisoned behind it. And the leadership listened. That's the thing about my people that you got most wrong, delegate. You thought we were weak because we were quiet, but we were never quiet because we were weak. We were quiet because we were disciplined. And the same discipline that let us hold our fire for 200 years is what let us finally decide as one people that the holding had to stop. Not because we got frightened, because we grew up. The Prime Envoy's words came back to her. Send them a future, not a warlord. She understood now, standing in the light, why Kesh had been so insistent. Because a warlord could have delivered the fleet. Only a young officer who had buried the frontier dead could deliver this, the reason, the grief underneath the steel, the thing that made 11,000 dreadnoughts not a threat but a confession. So we're done hiding, Alara said. Whatever happens next, whether you seat us or fear us or foolishly try to strike us, we are done. Earth is going to defend its people in the open from this day forward, the way every self-respecting power in this chamber defends its own. We would vastly prefer to do it as your ally, inside your treaties, bound by your laws, one voice among 10,000, spending our terrible strength on the common defense of a galaxy we'd like to think of, someday, as home. But if you say no, and here she did not raise her voice, and that was what made it land, then we'll defend our people anyway, outside your council on our own, and the galaxy will spend the next 1,000 years with a strong, isolated, untreated Earth on its border. And I promise you that is the worst outcome for everyone in this room. Not because we'll attack you. We won't. But because a galaxy with an outsider that powerful is a galaxy that can never rest, and you will spend generations building fleets to guard against a war that would never have come, and bleeding your treasuries dry out of a fear we would have gladly, gladly let you set down. Say yes, and you gain the strongest ally in council history. Say no, and you gain the most expensive neighbor imaginable. That's the arithmetic. It always was. You just couldn't see the numbers until now. For a long moment, nobody spoke. 11,000 dreadnoughts hung silent in the sky. 10,000 delegates sat in the light of them, each one running, Alara knew, the same calculation, and each one arriving, she hoped, at the same answer. It was Karthvom of the Ossic Dominion who broke the silence. The heavy world delegate, whose contempt had opened this session, whose 3,000 ships had been meant to bury Earth's petition forever, rose slowly on its ceramic limbs. Every eye in the chamber turned to it. If any delegate would call for a first strike, for the reckless war of the frightened, it would be this one, the proud warlord whose fleet had just been rendered a rounding error. Commander Voss, Karthvom said, and its translated voice was slow and grinding and utterly without its earlier scorn. I came to this session to see your people humbled. I will not pretend otherwise. You have earned honesty. I have spent my life measuring strength, and I believed I understood it better than any being in this chamber. I was wrong. It paused, and the pause cost it something. The whole chamber could feel the cost. You have taught me something my ancestors knew and I had forgotten. The strongest warrior is not the one who strikes. It is the one who need not. You held 11,000 blades against our throats for 60 years, and you let us live, not out of weakness, but out of a discipline greater than any I have ever commanded. My dominion has ruled its frontiers by fear for 9,000 years, and I have always believed fear was strength. Its ceramic plates settled. A gesture Alara's briefings had taught her was the Ossic equivalent of bowing a head. You have shown me, in a single hour, that fear is only ever the strength of those who have nothing better. I will not vote to strike you, human. I will vote to seat you. And I will spend what remains of my life trying to understand how a people so young became so much wiser than a people so old. The words fell into the chamber like a stone into still water, and the ripples went out and out. Because if the proudest warlord in the council, the one being certain to demand blood, would instead bend the knee to Earth's restraint, then the frightened factions had lost their loudest voice before they had even found their own. Alara felt something loosen in her chest that had been clenched, she realized, since the moment she pressed the device. Not victory, not yet, but the first true sign that the bet might pay. The Speaker of the Council let the silence hold a moment longer. Then it raised its long, script-lit arms, and the great luminous display that had once measured Earth's negligible fleet strength dissolved, and in its place appeared the ancient sigil of the Council in full session, the summons to a formal vote, a thing that had not been convened in emergency for 1,000 years. The petition of the Terran Compact, the Speaker announced, and its voice rang now to every tier and through the beacons to every waiting government across the stars, is called to the floor. Let it be recorded that the Council was, this day, gravely mistaken in its measure of a people. Let it be recorded that Earth came to us armed with the power to destroy, and asked instead for the honor to belong. And let it be recorded. The Speaker looked down at the small, warm creature standing alone in the center of the amphitheater, beneath the shadow of her people's patient strength, that it was we who were weighed and found wanting, and that a child of a young world taught the oldest powers in the galaxy the meaning of a word we had grown too proud to remember. Delegates of the Council, on the admission of Earth. How do you vote? Alara Voss stood in the center of the grand chamber, 29 years old, daughter of a hull welder, granddaughter of a secret kept for 100 years, and she watched the votes rise through the tiers like the lights of a city coming on at dusk, 1, and then a dozen, and then 100, and then 1,000, and then a tide of them, a flood, a galaxy's worth of ancient minds choosing at last to be neighbors rather than to be afraid. She thought of her mother's hand on hers at the edge of a hidden shipyard. Maybe you'll be the one who gets to stop. She thought of the frontier colonies they had let burn, and the promise that no colony would ever burn unanswered again. And when the final tally bloomed above the chamber in the plain white light of an accepted petition, she did not cheer, and she did not weep. She simply looked up, past the votes, past the crystal dome, to the 11,000 dreadnoughts that had darkened the sky of the mightiest council in the galaxy, and she signaled them, at last, to stand down and come home. The fleet that was built to never be used had, in the end, won the only war that ever mattered without firing a single shot. And the galaxy that had dismissed Earth as weak learned, in the space of a single hour, that the most dangerous thing in all the stars is a people strong enough to be gentle, and patient enough to wait 200 years to prove it.